The plates were already set on the table. That's the detail that breaks you, not the blood, not the smell, not what was hanging in the doorway. It's the plates, 2 of them, carefully arranged, with cutlery laid beside them the way you'd set a table for a Sunday roast, except the meal on those plates had a name. And 48 hours earlier, he had been alive. February 29, 2000, Street. Valentine's Day had just passed 2 weeks before. Aberdeen, New South Wales, Australia, a quiet town of roughly 5,000 people. The kind of place where everybody knows your car and your business and your sins. John Charles Thomas Price was 44 years old, a supervisor at a local mine, a father of 3, a man his friends described as larger than life. Big laugh, big personality, always good for a beer and a story. He was also a man who had made one catastrophic mistake. He had fallen in love with Catherine Mary Knight, and she had never intended to let him go. To understand what happened inside that Fibro house on Andrew Street, you have to understand what Catherine Knight was. Not who she presented herself to be, the doting grandmother, the abattoir worker, the woman who could charm a room full of people with a sharp wit and an easy smile. You have to understand what she was underneath all of that, in the dark places where love curdled into something unrecognizable. Catherine Knight was born in 1955 in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, the youngest of a set of twins. Her childhood was a wreckage from the very beginning. Her father, Ken Knight, was a violent alcoholic who raped her mother multiple times a day, sometimes in front of the children. Her mother told Catherine from an early age that men were only good for one thing, and that Catherine should take a butcher's knife to the first man she slept with. That was a metaphor, that was instruction. Catherine grew up watching violence the way other children watched cartoons. It was background noise. It was Tuesday by the time she was a teenager. The behavioral signs that would later define her were already forming: explosive rages, obsessive attachment, a terrifying inability to accept rejection. In school, she threatened classmates with scissors. She spoke openly about violence as a form of love. Her first serious relationship set the template for everything that followed. David Kellett married Catherine in 1974, and on their wedding night, she choked him nearly unconscious because she felt he hadn't been attentive enough to her during the reception. He survived. He had 2 daughters with her before escaping to Queensland to get away from her. She tracked him down, left their 3-week-old baby on a set of railway tracks. In retaliation, the infant was found by a passing stranger just in time. Just in time. A second relationship produced another child and ended with Catherine attacking the man with a frying pan, fracturing his skull. A third relationship, with John Chillingworth, produced a son and ended, as all the others had, in chaos and broken bones and police reports that somehow never added up to a prison sentence. Then came John Price. They met in 1993. Price was separated from his wife, raising his kids. Working long hours at Bowdoin's quarry, Catherine was between disasters. Working at the Aberdeen abattoir, a job she had held for years and excelled at in a way that, in hindsight, nobody should have found comforting. She was skilled with a knife, extraordinarily skilled. Her colleagues would later say she could skin an animal with a precision that made the other workers uncomfortable. Not because it was slow, because it was fast, and surgical, and joyless, and perfect. Price knew about her history. He wasn't naive. Friends warned him. He warned himself, actually at one point. He walked into the local police station and told officers that if he ever turned up dead, Catherine Knight had done it. He said it plainly, without drama. The way a man says something he doesn't quite believe but feels compelled to put on the record anyway. The officers took note. Life went on for 7 years. The relationship existed in a cycle that anyone who has ever witnessed domestic abuse will recognize immediately: explosive violence followed by honeyed reconciliation, followed by more violence, each orbit tightening. Catherine stabbed him once early in the relationship. She smashed his dentures so he couldn't go to work. She told his children things about him designed to fracture his family. She threatened anyone she perceived as competition. She was a gravitational force. You didn't leave her orbit. You escaped it. In early 2000, Price finally pulled the pin. He had consulted a solicitor. An apprehended violence order was being prepared. He told Catherine it was over definitively, clearly, with the kind of finality that left no room for misinterpretation. He told her to get out of his house. She didn't. The night of February 29th began deceptively normal. Price's two children, his son and his daughter, who Catherine referred to in a handwritten note as Beck and Little John, were not home. They were away that evening, unknowingly spared from whatever was already taking shape in their mother's absence and Catherine's presence. Price came home from work. Neighbors later reported seeing nothing unusual. What happened inside those walls in the hours that followed would take forensic investigators days to fully piece together. And even then, some of the psychological machinery of it, the why of it, the how does a human being actually do this, remains something that resists ordinary understanding. Price and Catherine had sex that night. The bedroom would later confirm it. Then she waited for him to sleep. Detective Inspector Peter Muscio was one of the first officers inside the house on the morning of the 1st of March. A neighbor had come by, noticed something wrong, and called it in. What Muscio encountered when he crossed that threshold is the kind of thing that rewires a person, the kind of scene that veteran detectives still describe in The Flat. Careful language of someone deliberately managing their own horror. I remember walking down the hallway, Muscio later said, and at about shoulder height there were all these blood splatter marks on the walls. He read the room the way detectives are trained to read rooms, not as a scene of carnage, but as a sequence of events, each bloodstain a sentence in a story being told backward. Price had been asleep when the first blow landed, or the first blade. The attack began in the bedroom, where arterial blood had arced across the robe, the bed, the doorframe. This wasn't a single clean strike. The spatter pattern told a different story, a desperate, prolonged story. He's absolutely fighting for his life, Muscio said. The bloke's just had a bonk in the bed when he wakes up. Then stab, stab, stab. John Price was a large man, strong, a mine supervisor who worked with his hands, and even bleeding out, even wounded beyond what most people survive. He fought, he got out of the bed, he made it to the doorway. There was a bloodied handprint near the dressing table, smeared like he had grabbed for support. Blood around the light switch he had tried to turn on the light. A reflexive, human act in the middle of a nightmare. He had tried to see what was happening to him. He made it into the hallway. Handprints on both walls, low and then lower. A record of a man being slowly unmade as he moved. Every mark told Muscio exactly how fast he was fading, exactly how hard he was still trying. He reached the front door. He got it open. The screen door was shut. There is blood staining, trajectory again. Flicking out across the front door, Muscio said, "He's almost made it, almost." John Price collapsed just inside his own front door. A few inches and a latch screen between him and the outside world. Between him and a street where someone might have seen, might have heard, might have helped. He would have been absolutely horrified, terrified, Muscio said. Probably terrified more than horrified, trying to get out and all the time being stabbed. He died on the floor. And then the work began. This is the part of the story where most narrators would soften the detail, reach for euphemism, let the horror live at a slight remove. I'm not going to do that. Not because of an appetite for the grotesque, but because the truth of what Catherine Knight did that night is the only thing that fully explains why she is the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The detail is the argument. The autopsy confirmed that John Price was already dead when she started. She went to the kitchen and retrieved a knife. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Timothy Lyons, would later reconstruct every movement from the evidence left on the body. The blade was razor sharp, the kind of sharpness you achieve through practice, through professional familiarity with the tool and its work. She inserted the tip just below his collarbone. She drew it horizontally, shoulder to shoulder, right beneath the clavicles. The cut, Dr. Lyons noted, was anatomically precise. Not hacked, not frenzied, a straight, clean line. The kind that requires knowledge of the body and control of the hands and the complete absence of hesitation. Then she turned the knife and drew it down the center line of the chest, over the sternum, across the abdomen, to the pubic hairline. A T shape was formed horizontal across the top, vertical down the center. She worked carefully around the genitals, deliberately preserving them around the pubic area, down the front of the thighs, over the knees, all the way to the feet. She moved up the body. She lifted each arm and cut down the back surface. She drew the blade across the top of the skull. Then she peeled. The entire skin came away in a single piece. The hair, the face, eyes, nose, lips, ears, the scalp, the genitals, the stab wounds, still visible, still bleeding, now just holes in a pelt, one unbroken piece of a man who had laughed and worked and loved his children. She took that piece, that complete, contiguous, human skin, and hung it from an S-hook in the doorway of the hallway, the feet dragged on the ground. Later, police would note it looked almost like a coat hung up after a long day. Then she removed his head at the C3-C4 vertebral junction, right at the top of the shoulders. A single, decisive cut, clean through the joint. The whole process, Dr. Lyons estimated, took approximately 40 minutes. She cooked. The head went into the large pot on the stove, John Price's head, boiling on the element in his own kitchen, in his own cookware. In the home he had tried to reclaim from her. From his buttocks, she carved portions, seasoned them, cooked them properly, set them on the plates. She laid the plates on the table, two of them with cutlery, as though expecting guests. The note she had written and left in the house named the guests: Beck, little John, his children, his teenage daughter and his son. The same children who had been away that night and had no idea what was waiting for them at home. Investigators would later debate whether she actually expected them to return and eat, or whether the tableau was something else, something theatrical, something meant to communicate a final, definitive statement of power. The plates were real. The preparation was real. The intent, whatever its ultimate nature, was real. What is not debated is that police arrived before the children did. Catherine Knight was found unconscious on the floor near the body. She had taken a significant quantity of prescription medication, an apparent overdose attempt, and was rushed to hospital, where she was stabilized. When detectives arrived at the house on the morning of March 1st, the full scope of what had occurred revealed itself in stages. The blood trail in the hallway, the skinned body in the living room, the head in the pot, the plates on the table. The pieces of meat in the backyard later confirmed to be portions of the victim's buttocks, suggesting she had begun to prepare more than what was already plated. Price's children were located and informed before they could return home. Whatever Catherine's intentions had been for those two plates, they were never realized. Catherine Knight was charged with murder. She pleaded not guilty initially, then, in October 2001, changed her plea to guilty just as the trial was about to begin. It was a strategic move, possibly designed to avoid the full public airing of evidence, possibly driven by other calculations known only to her. It didn't work the way she may have hoped. Justice Barry O'Keefe sentenced her to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. In his judgment, he described the crimes in exhaustive detail, the way courts force themselves to do when the facts themselves must speak. He noted that the skinning and preparation of the body demonstrated a sustained, purposeful, methodical operation carried out over hours. In a state of full awareness, Catherine Knight was not legally insane. The court found her fully cognizant of her actions. She had a personality disorder, antisocial, borderline, histrionic features documented over decades, but she knew what she was doing. Every cut was intentional. Every plate was placed with full understanding. She remains incarcerated in Silverwater Women's Security Institution. She has reportedly made multiple parole applications in the years since her sentencing, each denied in prison. She has perhaps unsurprisingly worked in the kitchen. John Price's children grew up without their father. His friends still talk about him in Aberdeen: the big laugh, the easy presence. The man who once walked into a police station and told officers, with the casual certainty of someone who does not quite believe their own words, that if he ever turned up dead, he wanted them to know who had done it. He was right. He always knew he was right. He just couldn't bring himself to fully act on the knowing before the knowing became irrelevant. That is perhaps the most heartbreaking dimension of this story, not the brutality of what Katherine Knight did, though that is beyond ordinary comprehension. It is the long road of warnings and whispers and second chances and almost escapes that preceded it. The police report years before the murder, the violence she had inflicted on previous partners, the children she had endangered, and the skulls she had fractured, and the solicitor's office he had finally visited in those last weeks of January 2000. He was 48 hours from an apprehended violence order when he died. 48 hours, the plates were set, the skin was hanging, the head was in the pot, and outside on street, Andrews Street, Aberdeen. The morning was beginning the way mornings do: birds, traffic, the smell of someone else's breakfast, entirely unaware of what the night had produced. Detective Muscio walked out of that house and stood in the sunlight for a moment before beginning his notes. He has spoken about the case in the years since carefully, professionally, with the measured language of a man who understands that some things, once seen, become a permanent resident of the mind. He almost made it, he said. Almost. The front door was open, the screen door was shut. That's the detail that stays with you long after everything else fades. Not the plates, not the pot, not the skin hanging in the doorway with the feet dragging on the ground. The screen door, latched. Katherine Mary Knight, age 44 at the time of the murder, remains Australia's most notorious female killer. John Charles Thomas Price was buried in Aberdeen, New South Wales. He was 44 years old.